So the first time that I went to Nuyorican Poets Cafe in Brooklyn, I was completely and utterly moved. I think that was the first time that I was inspired to really write and to share what it is that I write about. Also, Jasmine Mans from Newark, New Jersey, top down, we gotta start that over. Top down, hands down is what I meant to say. I'm visionary, and I'm from North Jersey, South Plainfield to be specific. Here. So I write spoken word poetry, and I'm also an educator. I just began performing as I approached the classroom, which was about 2 years ago, and that's when I became comfortable with being vulnerable publicly, because a lot of the things that I write about are things that are personal to me. Yeah. So I grew up in a single parent household as an only child. I do have two siblings, love them to death, from my dad, but my dad was pretty absent throughout the majority of my life. I also grew up with different members of my family up until I was 7. So very, like, a lot of love, but then shifting back over to living with my mom, I feel like I became a little bit more like angry about the family dynamics that I grew up in, and I felt like it fit right into the stereotypes of having a single parent or like a broken home and moving around a lot. And when I grew older, I feel like creativity is what allowed me to break free from that stereotype and from internalizing what it is that I felt society portrayed Hispanic, Black, and brown families to be like. My father was also incarcerated for a majority of my life, so that was another avenue that I became angry with, but it also encouraged me to explore law and social justice to the extent that I have. So growing up, I faced trials and tribulations because I realized that my lifestyle was similar to that of what society had been telling me my entire life. Similar to the story that is told on behalf of Black and brown children, and that is growing up in a broken home. So for the first 7 years of my life, I was actually living with different members of my family. And I grew up around a lot of love. My family is absolutely phenomenal, but still that sense of brokenness, just because you see that it's not what more privileged or your affluent classmates are living like. And so I went to move with my mom when I was 7, grew up in a single parent home as an only child. My father was incarcerated for much of my life. And so again, that kind of stirred interest in me to like explore law and then also social justice, because I realized that that's another avenue that like society paints that picture of Black and brown men, and he kind of fit into that as well. Also, finding out that I was gay kind of stirred yet another sense of identity crisis within me. And among many other things, I decided to like explore creativity, but I wasn't comfortable sharing and or being vulnerable until I got older. So I grew up around a lot of love, but it was very confusing, and we had our hardships as a family. So the incarceration of my father actually stemmed a lot of poetry surrounding social justice. My latest one is called The Revolution, will not be televised, and I feel like that piece directly stemmed from just seeing the things that he went through as a black man in prison. And then also just in the justice system. I also feel like his situation, in addition to my mom, both of them, their highest level of education was high school. And so I learned the importance of education and how my life outcomes differed from theirs just simply on the basis of education levels. And so that's kind of what led me to the classroom. They grew up in the hood. They were not very well educated as a result. And I believe that it kind of directed their life outcomes to an extent. And so I feel like social justice is a huge proponent of the education system that is often overlooked and or just missing, whether that's intentional or not. And lastly, I am looking to pursue my education in law school next year. I want to be this spoken word poet, attorney, to just kind of advocate for people who are underserved in any and every way possible. So whether that be because you are gay, because you're Latino, because you're Muslim, like, I believe that everybody deserves advocacy. So the first time that I went to Nuyorican Poets Cafe in Brooklyn, I was completely and utterly moved. I think that was the first time that I was inspired to really write and to share what it is that I write about. Also, Jasmine Mans from Newark, New Jersey, top down, we gotta start that over. Top down, hands down is what I meant to say.
2, 1.
The first time that I was, here I go again. You told me to wait 2 seconds. The first time that I was utterly and completely moved was when I went to Nuyorican Poets Cafe in Brooklyn. I was completely moved by every artist that performed there. And from that point forward, I knew that I wanted to perform and I knew that I wanted to really write so that I could share the way that those people share and reach people the way that they reached me. Additionally, Jasmine Mans, a poet from Newark, New Jersey, is hands down my favorite poet. And I was inspired from her from the first time that I saw her. She performed Dear Ex-Lover, and I watched that on YouTube about 35 times, and I was equally as inspired every time that I watched it. So my favorite movie has to be Save the Last Dance. Definitely a classic. If you haven't seen it, don't talk to me. And favorite album is gotta be K.O.D. by J. Cole. Everything Cole touches turns to fire, but that might be the one for me because it was very raw and I felt like he sent a lot of messages to society and to the music industry that are necessary. Even to us as a young generation listening to this stuff, like, kind of made me more cognizant of who and what I support and who and what I allow to drive my energy because music drives my energy, so. When I engage in activism, it's my goal to just touch one person. And if I touch more, great. But if I touch one person, I'm of the belief that that one person can then turn around and create waves for one more person and one more person. And so I look at activism as sort of just reaching for people. And in addition to that, I don't like the way that we are often perceived in social media, on TV, and just in the media in general. And so I feel like if I can be a face on social media that's doing something different, that's doing something positive, and that's potentially creating change, then I'm happy and I'm content with whatever it is that I'm doing. So there's a lot of things that zap my creativity. I think the number one thing though is trials and tribulations. Like when I go through heartbreak, I'm very quick to write. If I'm upset about something, if I see something that bothers me, I'm quick to write about it. So I guess like pain zaps my creativity. And then I also get very easily inspired by other creatives. And so whenever I go to creative events where I'm surrounded by a lot of creativity, whether it be artists who paint or artists who do music, I love to see people who are not this glorified icon on TV, but are rather like everyday people who are just trying to hone in on whatever it is that they're passionate about. That definitely drives me. So like Ugly Steven, for example, an up and coming poet, I get utterly inspired by him every time that I see him perform live. Every time that I see him put out a t-shirt, every time that I see him on social media going on rants about things that matter. Also, Art by Vic. So when I see her paintings and I see her doing her thing on social media or in person, I am completely moved. And then it makes me pick up my pen and start writing as well. If I could collab with Tupac Shakur, I absolutely would, because I adored his mentality to a degree that I can't even begin to explain. I really love how he did something that was different and he owned it, and he didn't care about the pushback that he would receive. And I just thought that he was dope. Like his swagger, he knew who he was, and there was nothing that could sway his art. He was going to put out his art the exact way that it was intended to be put out, despite how that would impact him or perception of him. If I could do J. Cole right now, hands down, it'd be a Cole world. I love everything that Cole does. I feel like he's very conscientious. I feel like he is not about capitalism. And so if I could collaborate with someone who has as much stain as he does, but then also as much knowledge and conscientiousness as he does, then my work would elevate. I think that I would see the world differently. I think that I would see art in a different way as well. Lastly, Sean Crisis. So Sean Crisis is somebody who does music, but also spoken word poetry. And yeah, I gotta go check him out. I can't even really say too much because he's woke. He talks about things that affect him, but also affect many other people as well, including myself. And I think that he does it in a way that is not really heard of, because he mixes like spoken word and also music, and he does it seamlessly. So I think that I have a lot to learn from him, but also if we collabed, Sean, come on, Sean. That should be tough. I knew that I was gay in the 5th grade when I had my first crush on a little shorty. And then when I was in the 7th grade, it was the first time that I actually had a girlfriend. I hid it as being my best friend though for some time. I didn't come out until I was a sophomore in high school. And so the experience of like growing up in the closet was very difficult because it adds another layer of hardship that you have to go through. Especially being a minority and also being a woman is already enough hardship. So that added another component. And then in addition to that, I felt like I couldn't really be myself in front of my family, the people who I love the most, because traditionally Hispanic cultures are not okay with that. And so I was very afraid of how they would react. It spills over a little bit into my writing. So when I first began writing, I used to change the pronouns from her to him, just because I wasn't ready for all of that yet. And then, but again, that's part of the reason why I wasn't vulnerable and wasn't sharing my work, because I knew that it wasn't authentically me yet. And I feel like it is difficult being gay because not a lot of people openly, fully like accept it. I feel like people accept it from a distance. And so like now it might be a little bit more fashionable than it was back then. But there's still people who give me looks and who stare at me, and I can't kiss my girlfriend in public or hold my girlfriend's hand without being looked at or stared at. And I feel like men are not very receptive to the concept or the notion yet. I think that they still feel like they are entitled to women who love women. and that's problematic for me as well. And then dating is real difficult because then you have a lot of people, a lot of women who are curious now because it's fashionable. And so that adds another layer of trust issues because now I'm like, okay, are you into women or are you having fun and trying to experiment with women? And that's hard because I know for a fact that I love women. And so it's kind of making myself vulnerable to be hurt. History has always turned me off. I felt like his story was always white America's story. I felt like we were only taught what they wanted us to know as opposed to what is true and what is factual. And so when history was taught to me, I turned a blind eye. I lost interest. I became disengaged because it just never sat right with me. It never felt authentic. And then the more that I knew I wasn't learning, I flipped through all those pages and I never found myself. I never found my history. I never learned about my people. And that to me made it unrelatable. I don't like history the way that it's taught in America because I don't feel like it's true. I feel like there are many gaps and I feel like I cannot find pieces of my own identity within America's history. The first time that I inquired about my race and heritage was when I had to check a box on a job application. It said Caucasian, Hawaiian Pacific, African American, no other options. So I was really distraught. I'm like, oh no, because I'm none of these things and I refuse to accept any one of them as my identity. I literally went to the hiring manager and I was like, I'm none of these things, so, and there's no other box. And we spoke about it. I ended up checking Caucasian and African American because those were the two things that made sense. To this day, I still don't know my history to the extent that I should. I have been to the Dominican Republic several times and I learn bits and pieces of history as I do so. But I become frustrated because I know American history and I know Black history, but I don't know my own history. I know that Dominicans, for example, are of African descent, but I don't know the history and the story behind how we got there or how that came to be. And so currently, actually, after I leave here today, I'm gonna do some research because my journey will continue in terms of finding out who I am and what my ethnicity means. The standard of beauty is something that I always have questioned in and of itself. Like, who determines what beauty is? For so long, we've been conditioned to think that beautiful has one cookie cutter sort of definition. It looks like one sort of thing which is like slim, maybe skinny, narrow noses, defined cheekbones. For males, sort of the same thing, like masculine, and masculine is typically defined as muscular, nice bodies, tall. And so I feel like a lot of times we are conditioned to feel like if we don't fit into what we see as models traditionally or on social media or on advertisements, then we're not beautiful. But really, what is beauty? Is beauty the way that somebody dresses? Is beauty the way that somebody articulates their thoughts? Is it the way that they carry themselves, their demeanor? Because I find that a lot of times those are things that we are naturally attracted to, but we sometimes don't want to show that person off because we feel like they don't fit into what society has deemed to be beautiful. And sometimes we don't. For males, I've heard males say, my guy friends, like, oh, nah, chill, like, the boys won't think she's beautiful. They don't want to show her off to the boys because they are afraid of what people would think. But really, who are they to determine what beauty is? If you found that person beautiful, then they are beautiful. Period. With a T. A life philosophy that I'm still striving towards adapting each and every day is that life is 10% what happens to you and 90% how you react to it. So many things in life are circumstantial, and it would be oblivious to think that circumstances do not impact you. However, the way that you react to it has much more of an influence and much more of an impact on your life trajectory. So with that being said, if you're having a bad day, take that, own that, feel that, but also strive in a different direction or use that, absorb it in order to help you grow. Sometimes life is going to be uncomfortable, but that's where growth happens. And so just remember that your circumstances do not define you, but rather your actions and your response to them do. Dear ancestors, I never wanted this relationship between us to end. I'm addressing you via this letter, and so it begins. 1, it's not you, it's me. You caught me red-handed, cheating on you with a culture that never belonged to me. 2, you never even gave me a chance to explain. 3, and if you give me the chance to, I would have told you that it started as a one-night stand. Assimilation grabbed me at the hip and took me on a Eurocentric trip. 4, it's not me, it's her. I was minding my business when she came on to me. That whole night was a blur. 5, devil in a striped dress and land of the free, and after intercourse, we pillow talked. She told me that the American dream was everything you'd ever wanted for me. You know, go to college, get a degree, bury myself in loans, pay a couple Sally Mae fees, bump trap music on the way to my 9 to 5, but pull up, tuck my shirt in, and remember not to speak too jive. 6, I am grateful for you. I don't express it as much as I should because my history textbooks taught me how to appreciate everything but you. 7, I know Christopher Columbus didn't discover you. 8, I love the way that you Afro-picked my Latina. From fields rooted in African descent and watered by fluent tongues that roll their R's to the sound of Latino Ebonics. 9, I never got the chance to thank you for the gifts you left me. From the kink in my curls to the rhythm that dances its way through my hips at the sound of a merengue and the pastel-colored melanin that radiates a glow beyond their stereotypes. 10, just because America doesn't celebrate your difference doesn't mean that I don't. 10, you are diaspora. 10, you are royalty. 10, you are king. 10, you are queen. You are Bantu Nats. You are doobies. You are immigrant. You are birth by C-section. You are pain yielding life. You are shackles failing to restrain. You are survivor of oppression. You are fist clasping testament. You are sun kisses earth. You are flesh refusing to crack. You are masterful color upon easel. You are beauty bestowed upon my soul. You are mother. You are father. You are everything they said you couldn't be. You are me, and I am you.
Slow clap. That was wild.